Hello everybody, it's George from Ireland. So I know this is a little bit early, but this is about Thanksgiving. I'll try and remember to do it on Thursday as well. But this is a very significant year for it, and there's been remarkably little comment on it, that it is the 400th Thanksgiving. I remember the 500th anniversary of Columbus's landing on the Bahamas. It's not so many years ago, but because obviously 1620 is when the Pilgrim Fathers landed at Plymouth Rock. Now, most of my viewers are not Americans, so they might be unfamiliar with the story. I haven't been to a Thanksgiving dinner since I was 7. I've only been to a few. And some Americans seem to be genuinely nonplussed that people in the rest of the world usually don't celebrate this fate because it's not pertinent, it's not part of other people's historical experience, generally speaking. Obviously, Canada marks Thanksgiving. They celebrate it in October just to prove they're not American. And the Filipinos and people who are in countries which are under heavy American influence, they sometimes mark Thanksgiving. Some in the United Kingdom right now, and there's a small American community, probably under 1% of the population. Some places like Virginia Water, with a more sizable American community, where it will be celebrated in fine old style. I remember being on a bus from Heathrow Airport 2 years ago, and there was an American chap, probably just landed, and saying, in the United States it's Thanksgiving, but here it's just Thursday, which is true. So yeah, it was in 1620 the Pilgrim Fathers set for sail. So they were Protestant fundamentalists. They'd come from England, which the Church of England was the state church. Religion was absolutely not a private matter. It's up to the government. And if you didn't conform to the national church, you weren't a full member of the nation, and you would be legally discriminated against. So these people, they were Protestants outside the Church of England, which they felt was insufficiently Protestant. They were Puritans, as in no singing, no dancing, wearing drab colours, avoiding drunkenness. They weren't completely against alcohol. Hello, Benjamin. I shan't remark on that. Not entirely pertinent to the whole Thanksgiving story, although I know that your idol has got reason to give thanks. Anyhow, so they moved to the Netherlands, and at Leiden they tried to form their community, hadn't found it a success, and they chose to set sail. And I think you can still see the pub from out which that they took ship. Thanks, Benjamin. I remember in 1607, the anniversary of Jamestown's foundation, there was a model of one of those small ships that those first Jamestown immigrants had sailed on. But anyway, on the Mayflower, they set sail. Of course, they were intending to make landfall in Virginia, but navigation was exceedingly primitive in those days, so they only missed it by a few hundred miles and landed further north at Plymouth Rock, Massachusetts. So they named it Plymouth Rock because they'd come from Plymouth, that town in England, because the northern colonies mostly settled from eastern England, and the toponyms reflect that. You know, places like Boston or Braintree. I'm just trying to think, Haverhill, or Haverhill, I think you pronounce it there. Is there anywhere else that's got a name from eastern England? And whereas the southern colonies were settled from southwest England a bit more. But Plymouth is actually in southwest England, but these guys missed, which is why they ended up in Massachusetts. And they were soon starving. They'd signed the Mayflower Compact on their ship about governance, but only about half of those on shipboard were Puritans. Others were emigrating for other reasons. They tend to be flotsam and jetsam. Is really people who are socially marginal would emigrate. Who would take such a great risk of this long and perilous voyage? You could easily, your ship could sink, you'd be attacked by pirates, you could die of scurvy, or, you know, if you needed great medical aid, you're in terrible pain, they won't get you to a hospital. Will ever get to America. There are no hospitals. And there, the autochthonous people might be hostile. Well, why wouldn't they, these illegal immigrants trying to take their land? There might be diseases you haven't encountered before, wild beasts, so you could be torn apart by ravening animals. There were cougars, and not the kind I like to meet, who were there. But I think they're much further inland from New England. Anyway, so they were going to perish of famishment, so it appeared, until some kindly disposed Native Americans appeared from out the sylvan glade and proffered them some comestibles. And so, nourished by this brotherly love from people with whom they had no common tongue, they survived and prospered and built up their community. But it wasn't until much, much later, I think well into the 19th century, when it became a popular celebration. And it was unclear exactly when they were going to celebrate it. But finally, in the 20th century, it was decided we celebrate it on the 4th Thursday of November, which isn't always the last, because occasionally November's got 5 Thursdays. So a bit like Christmas before Christmas, people making an extra special effort to be with friends and family, and eat particularly American foods like turkey, because of course turkeys didn't exist outside the American continent until the 17th century when Europeans began taking them back. Or things like potatoes, well, they're really from South America. Tomatoes, chocolate, I can't watch cranberries. Are they originally American? Cranberry sauce? Is eggnog part of it? Alcohol or non-alcoholic? You're always welcome to come to my Thanksgiving celebrations here in Doral, Miami, Florida. Well, thank you, Benjamin Q. If you'd send me a ticket, I'd gladly come. I have never been to Florida. I have been to the United States, but only to New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Vermont, Maine, New York City, Washington, D.C., and a little bit into Virginia. But I would like to go back. I'm a big city person, so I very much like to see New York City again. I've not been since 2003, and perhaps Florida with the warm weather. I mean, I know people have been to Miami and didn't think that much of it, just a little bit too humid. They felt oppressively hot having to stay in all the time. And I mean, Miami might be great for having parties or going to the beach or something like that. But I knew some people who used to live in Sarasota said it was very, very livable. Anyway, so that's what Thanksgiving is about. And by American communities abroad, people celebrating it. But why hasn't there been more talk about this being the quarcentenary of it? And people traveling to meet each other. There's nothing compared to Arizona, as in Arizona is absolutely scorching. I always thought, was it given that name as in it's an arid zone, a desert state, seems to be mostly red sand. And I mean, I wonder why, white Americans first moved there. The Native Americans were there. Don't know how they survived, because it's almost impossible to do agriculture. This is long before air conditioning. And in the 19th century, these American citizens, they wouldn't have dressed for the climate. They wouldn't have just worn shorts and a t-shirt. The trouble is also you could get sunburnt if you didn't cover up your flesh a bit more. That's why, swimming trunks and bikinis and stuff came in the late 20th century when we had suntan lotion, because you couldn't expose your flesh to the scorching sun before that. And so how do people live? What were they farming? And there are hardly any animals to hunt. But anyway, somehow they managed to make it. And maybe later they find precious mineral resources made it worth living there. So that's Thanksgiving, a national holiday, and people watching those games of football, as in American football there, various celebrations, parades. So that's when it goes on. So I went to American school when I was little in Saudi Arabia, and we learned history began with Christopher Columbus. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And the next thing we learned was about the Pilgrim Fathers and wearing those hats. So they'd often wear dull colours like black, grey, brown, white shirts, have names, girls with names after virtues like prudence, faith, hope, charity, or biblical names like Abigail, Naomi. Boys likewise, biblical names. So hands to work and hands to God, thinking there's no such thing as innocent pleasure. So you must be either working or sleeping, praying, eating, drinking, washing. Cleanliness is next to godliness. But thought that these people, the poor benighted heathen, the Native Americans, were like Canaanites, and if you drave them off their land, well, you might be doing them a favor if you didn't bring the blessings of the joyous tidings of the gospel to them. And eventually governors were set over them. But I know that many of them have religious freedom, but then didn't when the English authorities probably got control of these colonies, say, well, the Church of England is the state church, and okay, you can worship outside it, but you'll be discriminated against, because other types of Protestant were allowed to worship in England, but they needed permission to build a church. Sometimes they didn't get that permission. They needed a license to preach on the street, which they sometimes didn't get. Someone like John Bunyan, author of Pilgrim's Progress, he was repeatedly imprisoned for preaching outdoors without a license to do so. So they're Baptists or Congregationalists or Presbyterians or just independents. Those are the Protestants going to America. There are very few English Catholics. Obviously, some of us from Ireland, mostly Catholics, started going. I think some Irish Protestants first, but the Irish Protestants usually weren't regarded as Irish in the 17th century. That's all from me, so please subscribe to my channel and donate with the greatest possible liberality. Say if there are any videos you would like me to make. Toodle pip.